Teachers, doctors, businessmen have already applied to replace Senator Johnny Isakson when he retires. More than 100 applications within 24 hours after Governor Kemp announced he was taking applications online. The governor will select the person to fill Isakson's seat until the special election in 2020. Now, there are the resumes you might expect for a powerful political position. There are also, I guess, what you could call political outsiders, like a forestry expert and a YouTuber. We noticed a few people who forgot to use spell check, and of those who have applied who do have political experience, people who worked for Governor Kemp and Senator David Perdue, and a former state Senate candidate as well. But how likely is it that the governor will pick from the online list of applicants? Honestly, there's no way to tell. His office will only say the governor will vet applicants and pick one that reflects the administration's vision for the future. History gives us a little perspective on what could happen in 2020 with Isakson's seat. Over the last decade, there have been about 17 appointments on the U.S. Senate. Of those, 7 did not run in the following election. 7 others did and won. So a chance the governor's selection to replace Isakson would keep the position in 2020. Since there's no primary for the special election, it will be open to candidates from both parties.
They used to pick Falcons head coaches that way too, Cheryl, many years ago.